Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories. The unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. That's right, folks. Just like it says in the intro, I am Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. I'm happy you're here. I'm also happy because my very good friend Anson Maddocks is back on the show. Hey Anson, how you doing?
Hello, I'm doing good.
Great to have you, as always.
Great to be here. Let's hear some kind of murdery stuff.
Oh, we are about to. So let me tell you, got a story for you today about violence and familial love and international intrigue and all kinds of wild stuff. And so, Anson, if you are ready, and listeners, if you are ready, please join Anson and me now as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murderies, father of the bride, the CIA hitman's daughter, and the murder of Gary Patterson starts now. In the sweltering summer heat of the El Paso County desert, a search had been underway for 3 grueling days. Leading the operation was a young female detective. She was now gripped by a sense of anticipation, the anticipation that often precedes a significant discovery in a homicide case. She harbored a strong conviction. The victim's body was concealed somewhere close. After a year marred by frustration, misleading details, and dead ends, she felt that today would mark a pivotal turn. Today, they would uncover what they had been tirelessly searching for. The search team was a diverse assembly, dog teams sniffing for any trace, high-tech gear scanning the rugged terrain, and volunteers from both a local military base and a nearby prison. I question whether the volunteers from the prison were actually volunteers unless they were employees and not inmates, but I digress.
Yeah, don't look over there.
These inmates here, they volunteered to search the sweltering El Paso desert for a dead body.
All their favorite spots.
Yeah, right. Nobody knows how to hide a body in the desert like these here inmates. Anyway, among the team members, a veteran Texas Ranger stood out. He was the one who stumbled upon the first clue. A human bone, seemingly disturbed and brought to the surface by animals. After the bone, he found a weathered tennis shoe, and then another bone. Each discovery heightened the tension, the anticipation, drawing the team closer to the truth they sought. The detective, leading the search, felt a surge of adrenaline, mixing with her growing optimism. This heady cocktail of emotion and determination signaled that they were on the brink of a significant breakthrough. Out of nowhere, she stumbled upon a pile of rocks arranged with eerie neatness. Hidden beneath was the grim discovery they had all been seeking: skeletal remains. Despite the somber nature of their find, a wave of relief swept through the team. Cheers and high fives were exchanged, a natural release after all the tension of the previous days. I think, declared the detective with a sense of achievement, that we've finally found what we're looking for.
So was it the bone that was found that gave her this feeling, or did she have a supernatural tingle in her toes about being about to find something?
Well, I think the Texas Ranger found a bone and then a shoe, and then they found a pile of rocks, right? And pro tip to all the aspiring killers out there, if you're going to be hiding a body in the desert, I do not recommend a pile of rocks or other sort of natural improvised grave marker as the last part of what you do.
This is Zevin Odelberg's pro tip, right?
Pro tip for aspiring murderers. Yeah. Rocks marks the spot doesn't sound like the best strategy for the aspiring pirate murderer or murdering pirate, what have you. So they found a body, and armed with photos and dental records in hand, the detective goes to the El Paso coroner's office, hoping to confirm that the body she found was in fact the body that she was looking for and not just yet another victim interred in the desert crypt. As she waited, she nursed a cup of bitter coffee, and another officer from the local police department brushed past her. He too carried a folder filled with photographs and dental records. They exchanged a few words with the coroner, and then he left with a smile. The fact that someone else had shown up with dental records and a case file and then seemed happy after his discussion with the coroner caused the detective to feel a sudden wave of weakness. She tried to stand but ended up sinking to the concrete floor. She was nauseous. After a few minutes, she gathered herself and called her partner, who was waiting with bated breath.
Zevin, would you say this is dramatic writing? That she sinks to the concrete floor? Right? Does that mean she floated down to where her toes were touching the floor, or does it mean that she slid onto the floor like Looney Tunes style, like a wet noodle?
Yeah. I think, I don't know, I think she felt sick to her stomach and collapsed to the floor because she realized that this was probably not the body she'd been looking for.
Like if she was a fisherman or a fisher person pulling, what she thought was a salmon to the surface of the water, it ended up being a bullhead, or a
great white shark. Yeah.
I don't know. I would hate for anybody that knew the deceased to hear us making light of it.
The good news is, so far we don't know who the deceased is, and we just found out that this particular deceased is probably not the deceased that we're going to focus on this story. So for now, it's just an anonymous corpse. She calls her partner and she says, "We finally found a body, but it's not ours." Mm-hmm. It was not the body that she'd been looking for. So, who was the detective looking for? Who was the body that she'd been hoping to find? Well, here begins our story. In mid-April 1997, a man introducing himself as Ned Wright walked into the Waco offices of Brazos Environmental and Engineering Services. He claimed to represent a Florida-based Fortune 500 company that was planning a secret development, which caught the staff's attention. Wright was tanned, mid-40s, gray hair, and he was notably vague about the project, mentioning only a large modular home community and significant investment. Despite offering no company name or business card, he expressed interest in hiring the Texas firm for preliminary work, requesting to see employee resumes. Sensing a lucrative opportunity, the company's executives welcomed Wright right away, even arranging for him to meet all staff members personally. So a stranger shows up with almost no identification or details, but implies that he's going to spend a lot of money, and he wants to see the personal information of all of their employees. And they say, "Okay, great.
Wow.
You're going to love this. Our employees even put their social security numbers on their resumes. Want to see?" No, that didn't happen. But, people get greedy and they do unwise things. They arrange for him to meet all the staff members personally. And he, this Ned Wright, emphasizes the importance of direct interaction, saying, "Well, I like to shake a man's hand and look him in the eye before I hire him," which is a request that the firm eagerly accommodated. If you're just a little bit suspicious, you might realize that what he's saying is, "I'm trying to find somebody, and I think he's here, and I want to confirm it." Did you hear my voice crack there? That was
It's
awesome.
human.
It is. This reminds me of the great line from the Chris Farley, David Spade classic movie, Tommy Boy. Mm-hmm. Brian Dennehy plays the father, and they make brake pads, and the competitor offers a lifetime warranty, and he doesn't, and one of his buyers asks why he doesn't have a warranty, and he says, "Well, I could get a damn good look at a T-bone steak by shoving my head up a bull's ass, but I'd rather take the butcher's word for it."
That's right.
So anyway, when Wright said, "I like to shake a man's hand and look him in the eye before I hire him," I was reminded of that shoving one's head up a bull's ass. That's how my mind works. So during Wright's visit to Brazos Environmental, he encounters a man named Gary Patterson, a 33-year-old draftsman, a lower-ranked guy in the company hierarchy, who doesn't even have a resume on file. Wright, for reasons that are mysterious to both Patterson and his colleagues, shows peculiar interest in Patterson. Again, I'm suspicious. Are you suspicious,
The way
Anson?
that you're talking about it, I am getting suspicious, yeah.
Well, this is sort of a crime mystery whodunit type of show, so I'm just trying to give the people what they want.
Okay, so he's in there headhunting?
Essentially, yeah. And that's what I find pretty interesting about this moment, right? Is that he wants to meet everybody, yes, but he's also thrilled to review everybody's resumes to see who's the most qualified. And then the guy that he settles on is the one that doesn't even have a resume on file and is one of the lowest ranking members of the company.
Right, but
He's like, let me look at everybody's resume. I need the right guy. Oh, you've got an intern with no resume? That's the guy I want.
basically the company is like, yeah, come on in and take whatever of our employees you see you find suitable for your needs.
Well, you've sort of put your finger on it. I don't think they've realized it yet, but his modus operandi here, as opposed to hiring the company under contract, It looks much more like he's trying to hire away their talent, which most companies are not overly accommodating.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out why that would be okay or in their best interests.
Right, agreed. He takes this particular interest in Patterson, and during his time in Waco, he repeatedly reaches out to him, telling him how impressed he is with him, even though they've only had short interactions. He proposes to Patterson that they take a trip to Florida so that Patterson can meet his partner and CEO and discuss a potential job opportunity. So it's exactly what you suspected. He's headhunting, not looking to hire the firm. So Patterson considers the opportunity, and this secret courtship with Ned Wright extends over 3 weeks, with Wright frequently contacting Patterson at work, sometimes under false pretenses or even anonymously. The receptionist at Bezos Environmental actually jokes with Patterson. She says, "Gary, it's that strange guy from Florida who doesn't want me to know who he is," whenever Wright calls. So Patterson agrees to go to Florida with Wright. But then Patterson says he'd like to bring his new girlfriend with him for a mini vacation. As soon as he says, "Yeah, I'll come with you, but can I bring my girlfriend?" all of a sudden Wright doesn't seem so interested anymore. He tries to talk Patterson out of bringing a guest, pointing out that it's going to be a brief trip and his company has a busy schedule. And then he comes up with a new plan. He says, "Look, you don't have to come to Florida. How about you come to El Paso and meet our CEO, talk about a development project there?" He frames the meeting as a formality, and he entices Patterson further with a job offer that includes a better position, higher salary, additional benefits, and he says a Chevy Suburban, a new Chevy Suburban as a signing bonus.
Dude. Oh man, it's like you know, hey, I'm gonna throw a wrench in your plans here. Is that okay? No, I'll give you a Chevy Suburban and raise your if you don't bring your wife.
Right. We can do what I wanted to do. You don't have to fly to Florida. Well, just come on over to El Paso. Right. After all, let's try to think of a place that somebody probably does not want to bring their new girlfriend to on a romantic vacation. El Paso, no offense to El Paso, but it's not exactly the redneck Riviera.
So you've been there?
So he says, I have been to El Paso. I even went over the border into Ciudad Juarez.
I've never been there.
But that's El Paso. Yeah. I don't necessarily recommend El Paso, and I really don't recommend Ciudad Juarez, at least not until the current unrest that's plaguing Mexico gets a little more under control.
Or you're not making any friends.
No offense, El Paso.
Especially if you're a murderer.
Juarez has... yeah. Well, and Juarez has been known as one of the most dangerous cities in the world for some decades now.
I have heard of Juarez,
I don't think I'm too far out on a limb here. So he says, yeah, forget about Florida. Come on to El Paso. We'll give you a new Chevy Suburban. And he says, by the way, if you want to come and if you want the Suburban, you can drive the Suburban back home with you. If you don't want to drive the Suburban home, we'll fly you home on the corporate jet. So he's really laying out the red carpet.
Yeah,
here.
He probably gets whatever he wants for the quote return trip. There's only limitations on the trip there.
Right.
Because one is a fantasy and the other is reality.
Yeah, exactly. And a dark fantasy at that. And for those of us, you and I and listeners who are in the midst of a true crime episode here, I think it's quite obvious to us just how shady all of this seems, especially in light of how quickly the guy's willing to spin the Rubik's Cube and change the parameters. But, it probably is exciting and it seems like a real opportunity, and you can see how somebody like Gary Patterson could get swept up in the moment of new opportunity and validation of talent and all that stuff. So it probably doesn't seem quite so obvious. You know, when Count Dracula is seducing you, I'm sure he's very handsome and charming. The people that notice that he doesn't reflect in the mirror might think it's obviously a bad idea, but Gary's the one being seduced, so let's give him a bit of a break. So Gary's caught up in the allure of opportunity, but he also doesn't want to risk his position at Brazos, so he only tells his girlfriend and his parents about this, along with a few close colleagues, about his trip to El Paso. Then, on the morning of May 3rd, 1997, after leaving his daughter with parents, he boards a 7:30 a.m. flight from Waco to El Paso. And he lands, he calls his parents and tells them he made it safely, and that phone call was the last that anyone heard from him. Gary Patterson had unknowingly stepped into a maze of deep-seated family animosity, international misdeeds, and deceptive identities. And on May 3rd, 1997, he disappeared without a trace.
Curious.
Over the following 15 months, his disappearance ignited a far-reaching investigation that drew in a lot of different law enforcement and investigative bodies. There were the Waco Police, the Texas Rangers, the FBI, a private investigator from California, the U.S. Marshals, the Secret Service, the State Department, the Border Patrol, the government of Honduras, and Interpol all worked together in an effort to unravel the circumstances of his vanishing. Hopefully everybody's as intrigued as I am, because we don't know what happened to Gary Patterson yet. But we do know that whatever happened, the police, the Texas Rangers, the FBI, a PI, the U.S. Marshals, the Secret Service, the State Department, the Border Patrol, and the government of Honduras all wanted to know too. Like, what? Is this a James Bond movie? Like, what is going on? At first, he disappears and it's just a standard missing persons case, but it quickly takes on a more ominous tone. Gary Patterson's father approaches the Waco police. He is convinced from the start that his son has been the victim of something terrible, and in particular, he is suspicious of Gary's ex-father-in-law, a man named Sam Urich. Gary had been married to Sam Urich's daughter Lisa, and their marriage was turbulent and brief, eventually crumbling into a contentious divorce and custody dispute. Now, Lisa's father, Sam, was a controlling and mysterious figure who boasted of past exploits as a CIA hitman, a money launderer, and claimed to have connections with notorious criminals. Patterson basically thought that his father-in-law was just a bullying asshole and a blowhard, and he doubted the authenticity of these various claims, particularly the CIA hitman part of it. But he did view his father-in-law, Sam Urich, with deep suspicion. In particular, Gary had been there for an incident when Sam stormed out of a Waco bank with $100,000 in cash after refusing to explain to bank officials where the cash came from. Which, if you can't source $100,000 in cash to the bank and then you run out of there, that qualifies as suspicious, and Patterson was nothing if not suspicious of his father-in-law. Now, unbeknownst to Patterson, Sam Urich may have been a blowhard, but he was not, or may not have been lying about his infamous resume. His background was darker and more complex than Patterson could imagine. The FBI had suspicions that Urich was involved in the 1986 Berlin nightclub bombing that killed American military personnel, which stemmed from a top-secret investigation dubbed Operation Circus, where Urich was linked to 2 ex-CIA agents accused of arms trafficking with terrorist nations. Urich allegedly aided the CIA agents by concealing them as fugitives, and then he was implicated in procuring and delivering explosives to the Libyan terrorists responsible for the Berlin nightclub attack. So, boy oh boy, not too long ago when I asked, what is this, a Bond movie? It sounds like Gary Patterson may indeed have married the daughter of a Bond villain, or at least a Bond henchman. Did you ever have an ex-girlfriend with a terrifying father, Anson?
Terrifying?
Or dubious?
I
shady?
think there's a chance that one of them might hear this, but it wouldn't be an ex. And I just mean, potentially you wouldn't want to piss him off.
Well, But you don't have to give any identifying information, or are you just saying that this guy might hear it and know it's him and be mad anyway, even if it was anonymous?
He wouldn't be
Is that
mad
what
to
you're
hear
telling us?
this. Okay, look, my father-in-law could be a dangerous man if you pissed him off.
Is that all we're gonna get? Do we need to have Brenda come in and give you a sign off or something?
No, I mean, he doesn't have like a reputation or anything. He's just, he's well armed and knows how to use his firearm.
Well, that's true of much of America,
Sure,
I think.
sure.
Let's see here. Patterson didn't know that his father-in-law was a Bond henchman or a Bond villain, but he did see him as kind of a shadowy figure involved in dubious ventures. Urich claimed to live off a small trucking business, Southern Sales in Conroe, Texas, but he had convinced Patterson to join him in several transient business ventures in Waco, like running an insurance agency and a marina. But every time they went into business together, Urich would vanish with the profits and leave Patterson holding the bag. There was a particularly alarming incident involving two armed men who stormed into the insurance offices demanding to know Urich's whereabouts, while Lisa, Patterson's wife at the time, and her infant daughter were present. This really does sound like the worst father-in-law ever. Whatever he's up to, it's shit that's scary enough that he's putting his daughter and grandchild at risk because dudes with guns are coming to look for him.
Attracting thugs.
Basically, Gary Patterson can't take this instability, the implied violence, the madness, the being left holding the bag and no profits, everything that's involved with being in business with his father-in-law. So he tells his father-in-law, look, I'm not going into business with you anymore. And he takes this job at Brazos Environmental. It seems like Urich viewed Patterson as a pretty useful person, as kind of a go-to patsy who could take the blame and not stop him from taking all the money. So as soon as Patterson says, essentially, I'm not going to be your patsy anymore, Urich starts pressuring his daughter, Lisa, to divorce Gary Patterson. And in October 1992, the marriage between Lisa Urich Patterson and Gary dissolves, and she gains custody of their 2-year-old daughter, although Gary is awarded significant visitation rights. The fact that Gary is awarded significant visitation rights doesn't sit well with Sam Urich. And then, 2 years later in the autumn of 1994, things take a darker turn when Lisa, aided by her father's financial support, goes into hiding to keep their daughter away from Patterson. She travels across the country from Nevada to California and even to Alaska, as Patterson and his family try to track her down. To some, Lisa claimed that her husband was deceased. To others, she alleged she was shielding her daughter from abuse. It wasn't until a private investigator funded by Gary's father in D.C., which cost about $14,000, located Lisa in Pilot Point, Oregon, that the saga took a new turn. Because by now, Gary had petitioned the courts and managed to gain custody of his daughter, since his wife had essentially gone on the lam. Lisa's flight with their daughter ended in August of 1996, when she was apprehended and brought back to Waco. So this is a 4-year period we're talking about, between 92, when they get a divorce, 94, when she disappears, and 96, when the authorities find her.
So how long has the guy not seen his daughter?
For 2 years, his wife disappeared with the daughter.
Wow.
I'm sure that was a terrible time.
Driven him nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. He now has custody, and she has limited visitation rights. She did still get some, which is pretty remarkable.
I mean, it's not legal to take off with someone's, your mutual kid.
No, it's actually considered kidnapping.
Yeah, so did she have to deal with that crime?
Yeah. In an interesting twist of fate, coincidence, or perhaps dark foreshadowing, her probation sentencing for abducting her own daughter occurred just one day before the arrival of the man known as Ned Wright at Brazos Environmental and Engineering, where we started this story. The suspicious guy who showed up who was like, let me meet all your employees, let me see all their information. Ned Wright showed up just one day after Lisa was sentenced to probation. And later, unsurprisingly, the Patterson family would consider that to be pretty suspicious. Especially, in hindsight, considering an odd request from Lisa. she had called the family asking for a photo of Gary, saying that the photo was for a locket that her daughter had, a seemingly innocent gesture that would later take on new significance. So against this backdrop of all this family drama and contentious allegations, Waco Police Detective Steve January, great name by the way, and Christina Woodruff prioritized uncovering more about the mysterious Ned Wright. They were obviously suspicious of him, and one of the details that Woodruff highlighted was that Ned Wright would travel everywhere in a taxi. So they reach out to Yellow Cab, where a driver remembers transporting a man from the Fairfield Inn to Brazos Environmental and back. They then discover that calls were made from room 105 at the Fairfield Inn to Brazos Environmental, but the room wasn't registered to Ned Wright. It was in fact registered to a Theodore Donald Young. And because of motel policy, they had a copy of his driver's license on file. So armed with the photocopy of the driver's license, they went back to Brazos Environmental, where everybody said, yeah, that's definitely Ned Wright, a.k.a. Theodore Young, who had been a federal fugitive since February 1995, evading a 51-month prison sentence for a $26 million fraud case in South Carolina. $26 million fraud, that's pretty good.
It sounds like something you could barter with.
Yeah. I mean, my dad once told me when I was a young boy, he said, son, if you're ever going to steal big. Nobody likes a petty thief.
Why settle for the lesser evil?
Well, it sounds like dubious advice, but I think it's actually a pretty wise observation. I mean, for example, somebody like Michael Milken, who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from people in the savings and loan crises of the 1980s, is now billed and considered a philanthropist, and I think teaches courses at USC maybe. I mean, if you steal enough money, you can squirrel away a bunch of it and then be rehabilitated, or maybe just go to some island with no extradition laws. But, if you steal a candy bar or you steal $500, you're just like a loser who's going to get the book dropped on you. So if you're going to steal big. Anyway, kudos to you, Theodore Young. $26 million sounds like a lot of money, but not kudos to you really, and certainly not for what you're about to be part of. When Patterson disappeared, his family, of course, was always suspicious of Sam Urich, but the authorities were skeptical about that. They felt like it was more part of the overall family drama, divorce, custody battle, blaming the wife's father. Like maybe there were personal feelings clouding the assumptions and accusations of Patterson's family. But this skepticism began to dissipate because of the diligent work of a private detective named Scott Sedimo, an investigator from, you guessed it, where I live, San Diego, California. Now, he was initially hired to track down Lisa when she had kidnapped their daughter, but he also started to investigate Sam Urich, suspecting correctly that he was financially supporting his daughter's flight from the law. And as he investigated Sam further, it became increasingly clear that he was a pretty shadowy figure entangled in business deceit scams and money laundering, just like he told his son-in-law
he bragged he was.
Right. He's like, I'm a badass mofo, don't you F with me. Yep. So Sedimo has a call with the Waco police detectives and tells them about an experience he had tailing Urich on a trip to the West Coast.
Wait. I think you should find out about how to pronounce his name.
I'm going to go with Sedimo.
Really? You're just going to go with that, huh? Okay.
All right.
Let's just real quick.
I mean, all right. Sure. Here we go. I'm Googling how to pronounce Scott Sedimo.
I think you're probably right.
Well, there's the Italian pronunciation would definitely be Sedimo, but what's the USA pronunciation?
Probably the same.
Scott Sedimo. There you go. Thank you for keeping me honest.
No problem, man.
While Sedimo was trailing Urich on the West Coast, he had spotted a leather-bound item in Urich's car. Initially, he thought it was a daily planner, but in fact, it was a little black book full of names and numbers. You want me to send you a copy of it? Sedimo asked, offering the crucial piece of evidence without detailing how he'd acquired it. Detective January, seizing the opportunity, didn't ask questions, and provided a FedEx number for the swift dispatch of the Little Black Book. The detective discovered numbers in the book with El Paso area codes, notably one listed next to the name Ted Young, aka Ned Wright, pointing to a deeper connection between Young and Urich. So they started looking a little bit deeper into Urich. I've never had a Little Black Book. I mean, I guess everybody just has a cell phone now, but did you ever have a Little Black Book, Anson?
It's a Little Black Book, exactly, in this sense.
Like a semi-secret book with all your like phone numbers and contacts of maybe just ordinary friends and family, but maybe also the nefarious or mysterious people in your life?
No, I'm surprisingly open about most of my life, I guess. I mean, there are people that I later discovered I did not want to have anything to do with. And so I guess hindsight, I had a black book to be.
Anson says, no, I never had a Little Black Book. I am an open book. Okay, good to know. Because that
sounds honest, doesn't it?
That's what right. Yeah, sure does. They get the Little Black Book from the private eye and they decide, you know what? It's time to really look into Urich. So Detective January says, I placed a call to him at his trucking company in Conroe in hopes of setting up an interview. I tried to persuade him to come up to Waco and talk to us, but he insisted that I come there. He made it clear he wanted me on his turf. And then, toward the end of the conversation, he began to say some really strange things. He started talking about my sons. He even knew their names. I've had you checked out, he said, and I know how much you love your kids.
Whoa.
And then he hung up.
Not good.
No. Startled by Urich's menacing tone, Detective January attempted to replay the conversation using the recorder connected to his phone, only to discover that he hadn't captured the exchange. He was so frustrated he kicked a trash can across the room. And then the situation got worse. By the time Detective January was able to visit Conroe, Urich had vanished, closing his supposed trucking business. What was left behind hardly resembled a legitimate operation at all. A single solitary rundown truck in the yard was the only physical asset. A deeper dive revealed that Southern Sales had operated under various names and had numerous supposed presidents. The tangible remnants of the business were primarily in the form of hefty, long-distance phone bills, some reaching as much as $2,000 a month.
That could be pretty valuable to investigators, though.
Yeah, I would think so. The bills were mostly calls to El Paso and also to international locations like Honduras, which suggested that Urich actually had a web of operations far beyond what met the eye. Yeah, and again, this was the late 90s, so long-distance phone calls were really expensive, and especially international phone calls. It wasn't like today where everybody's got a cell phone and you can kind of call wherever you want for relatively reasonable. You're racking up $2,000 a month bills with calls to South America. You're probably up to something.
Which meant you, on both sides, you had an interest in exactly where the calls were from and to, and how much, how long they were. I mean, you'd get these paper statements that were a complete list of every single call you made and how long it was, and you'd get that in the mail. And yeah.
This had just been a missing persons case, but as Waco police became aware of what was apparently some kind of international web of intrigue and nefarious deeds that Gary Patterson's ex-father-in-law was involved in, they realized that this case might be a lot bigger than just a missing person and that they were probably approaching or were already out of their depth. But help was on the horizon. A Texas Ranger named Matt Cawthon had been talking to a colleague of his with the McLennan County Sheriff's Office, who mentioned to him in kind of an offhand manner that he had heard about this missing persons case that might be a lot more. And so Cawthon reached out to Waco and offered to help Detectives January and Woodruff. And he also proposed that they ought to have a meeting with local, state, and federal agencies to develop a comprehensive strategy. And so they ended up including the McLennan County District Attorney, the assistant U.S. attorney for the Western District of Texas, and representatives from both the FBI and the U.S. Marshal's Office.
Right. Let's see what's going on there.
One of the members of this meeting was Matt Cawthon. I keep wanting to say Cawthorn, but there is no R there, who is a Texas Ranger. And he said, at the meeting, we reviewed everything that Steve and Christina being Detectives January and Woodruff, respectively, from the El Paso Police Department, everything Steve and Christina had compiled about the case. They outlined the contentious divorce and custody battle between the Pattersons, delved into Urich's shady dealings, and discussed the connections they'd established between Urich and Ted Young. And if you'll remember, I'm remembering myself, Ted Young is the man that they've now realized posed as Ned Wright and went to Patterson's workplace to recruit him, ostensibly, offering him flights on private jets and a new Chevy Suburban and all kinds of enticements to come and work for his supposed company. But it now seems as though Ned Wright, aka Ted Young, was actually an operative for Patterson's father-in-law, who is the Mr. Urich we are currently discussing. As they were talking about Ted Young's history, Cassie Roundtree, a deputy from the local U.S. Marshal's Office, briefly left the room to make a phone call, and then she returned smiling and said, "We've got him. We know all about him. We know where she is." She then provided a detailed account of the Marshal's Office's investigations into Ted Young, including surveillance efforts, and shared the latest update, which was that he had just crossed the border into Juarez, Mexico, pulling a trailer. And this was a major breakthrough in the case. Now, Detective Woodruff was a little bit surprised by Roundtree's revelation about Young's location, because if the Marshals knew Young was a fugitive and they knew his whereabouts, why had they not, and I was wondering this myself, why had they not apprehended him? After all, they are the U.S. Marshals, and apprehending fugitives is literally their job description. Why had they not apprehended him before he fled into Mexico? It just didn't make sense to me, said Woodruff. And maybe it didn't make sense for a reason. Perhaps U.S. Marshal Cassie Roundtree was just trying to look good in a room full of cross-agency luminaries, because for weeks she assured them of progress, implying that the case was exclusively under the Marshal's purview. But the Rangers and the detectives grew increasingly skeptical. Nearing 3 months following Patterson's disappearance, they decided they had to proceed independently with their investigation because, despite all of Roundtree's assurances, the U.S. Marshals didn't actually seem to be making any concrete headway. They got some help by the involvement of a man named Bill Johnson, who was a Waco-based assistant U.S. attorney, who was known for prosecuting, and I'm sure everybody's heard this story, knows this story, known for prosecuting the Branch Davidians. Do you remember the Branch Davidians?
Yeah, it was tragedy.
It really was a terrible story from all angles.
Yeah.
So Bill Johnson comes along, and a big help that he brings is addressing the jurisdictional challenge they're facing. Just exactly who should really be in charge of this case. Is it the Marshals? Is it the Texas Rangers? Is it the FBI? Like, who's doing what? So Patterson's got deep legal knowledge, and he goes and identifies a crucial angle. He says the Patterson case could be federal if it involved crossing state lines. So he finds a statute on interstate flight, noting that Patterson's flight to El Paso was scheduled to continue to San Francisco.
Wait, wasn't he a suspected murderer?
No, Patterson is just the guy who's disappeared.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
And I'm talking right now about U.S. Attorney Johnston, who helps the investigation because they're mired in this who's going to do what now. They thought the Marshals were handling it. The Marshals aren't doing anything. The El Paso police on their own don't have the resources.
Too many cooks.
Yeah, too many cooks. The Texas Rangers are supposed to do things only in Texas. They've now got this angle with Urich having a business that maybe goes all the way to Honduras. They've got Ted Young fleeing into Mexico. They're just not quite sure who the captain of this team is. And so Johnston comes in and he says, well, look, Patterson, yeah, he only flew to El Paso, but he was supposed to continue on to San Francisco. And because of that, we can treat this like a case involving interstate flight, which puts it under federal jurisdiction, which unlocks a lot of capabilities in the case. They then could get subpoenas and support from El Paso authorities, and also they got the FBI to open a missing persons case. So essentially, they were just able to bring a lot more leverage and metaphorical firepower to bear in terms of moving the solving of Gary Patterson's disappearance forward. The relative weight of the FBI is impressive. Or so I'm told. I've never had, thankfully, any interaction with the FBI before. Have you, Anson?
I'm sort of currently talking to the Department of Homeland Security, but that's probably as close as I've gotten to the FBI.
Yeah, and I imagine that's probably something you don't want to comment on too extensively.
I'm not actually worried about it. It might work in my favor.
Well, sure. Hey, if you want to tell us about it, fine. But listen, guys, Anson's not on any watch lists. But please tell us about talking to the
It's part of an attempt to recover a bunch of stolen artwork that I've been slowly recovering over time.
Wow. So where does the Department of Homeland Security come into play with recovering stolen artwork? I'm on tenterhooks.
They do work with international business crime.
Okay, got it.
If somebody sells something out of country or into country, and it's knowingly a stolen item, and it's a high value, then they will pick that up as it's actually a national security thing. It's financial security, that kind of thing.
Right, because high value pieces of artwork could be used to launder funds that could then be used to do terrible things.
Right, sure.
I imagine.
Yeah.
So to some extent, then they're sort of your liaison with Interpol or other international law enforcement agencies,
right.
Yes?
When if they want to search a piece of luggage in front of the people whose luggage it is, they often will have to, work with Interpol. And it's interesting.
Wow. At such a time that you feel free to discuss it fully, it sounds to me like the case of the stolen Anson Maddocks art could make one heck of a future Kind of Murdery episode.
I was actually thinking that you might appreciate it. You could probably help me put it to spoken word better, because I have trouble dealing with it. It's not a comfortable subject for me. And
sure. No.
So somebody else talking about it usually it works great that way.
I got to tell you, I would absolutely love to do that. Kind of Murdery is claiming the exclusive now. The case of the stolen Anson Maddocks art, that's not this episode. That's a future episode. But I imagine if you've got Homeland Security and Interpol involved, these must be some of your iconic pieces that you're attempting to recover, yes?
I didn't sell many of my pieces. Most of them were stolen all at once out of my house. Yeah. But I mean, it wasn't every single one of them, but it was actually most of them.
So we're talking about Llanowar Elves here, Cyclopean Tomb.
We managed to recover Llanowar Elves and Animate Dead.
Wow. Oh my God. And folks, just so you know, these are truly iconic pieces of pop culture, and we're talking 6+ figures in value. I am in a Facebook group for original Magic the Gathering art, and these pieces, first of all, they never come up for sale. Anson never sold them in the first place, but pieces by artists of a similar stature and historical import, these are extremely valuable works of art we're talking about, hence the involvement of Homeland Security and Interpol, etc. And boy, I do look forward to doing that episode with you in the future.
It did take forever to have it be your idea to do this.
So you've been wanting to do this
for a while. I've been thinking about it.
I was under the impression that you couldn't talk about it. There was a point in time when you couldn't really talk about it. Is that not true?
That's not the one I can't talk about.
Oh, that's another. Oh, wow. Okay, so then maybe there's a mysterious future episode. Well, so I didn't realize. I don't want you to think I was ignoring this opportunity or you. I was confused about your ability to speak about this. But I want to do a little peek behind the curtain real quick. As we record, Anson is painting. Would you be willing to share with the audience, Anson, what you're painting?
This is something that you commissioned. I don't know how long ago was it.
Oh, not long. Probably November of
Over a year.
2022.
So yeah, I just happened to be working on your order in the backlog, and it's the typo that I'm not sure if I could. Yeah, you do this part.
I'll give a little background. So, as many of you who listen to the show know, Anson Maddocks is the one of the original and legendary artists for the game Magic the Gathering. And in the original set of Magic the Gathering, there was a card called Circle Protection Red. It's a white card that protects you from red spells. Many of you may be familiar with the idea that wizards or other sorcerers, people that practice magic, there's a long-standing tradition that they can create a circle around themselves, usually with salt, in the practical application of casting the spell. But then within that circle, they could either trap a demon or often protect themselves. And the idea is that as long as they stay within the enchanted circle, that no magic can penetrate and harm them. So in Magic the Gathering, there is a circle of protection for each color of the opponent's spells. Circle Protection Red protects you basically from fire spells, and the art for that iconic card was painted by Anson Maddocks.
No.
But, I'm sorry, the art for that iconic card, thank you, the art for that iconic card was painted by Anson Maddocks' very good childhood friend, Mark Tadine, but the piece was credited to Anson. And so when you're a magic nerd like me who loves the original art and loves Anson's art, etc., I had an idea that a fun thing to do, since the card was painted by Mark but credited to Anson, would be to send the card to Anson and have him paint the circles of protection as what Anson Maddocks in 1993 might have painted if indeed he had done the original art for Circle of Protection Red. So since it was credited to Anson, he is kind enough to create for me Anson Maddocks' Circle of Protection Red. And one of the things that Anson does, besides painting all kinds of beautiful original art, is he does alters on cards, magic cards that he has painted the art for. In fact, he will not alter someone else's art. This Circle of Protection Red is an exception because of the crediting error and because he and Mark are very good friends. But if you are a Magic player who loves the art and loves Anson like me, and you would like to have a card altered with original work by Anson Maddocks, you can visit AnsonMaddocks.com and commission a piece like I did. And you will likely be communicating with his wonderful wife, Brenda, who couldn't be a kinder, more awesome person. So I do encourage you to visit AnsonMaddocks.com, whether you're interested in alters or any of Anson's other incredible work.
You might have to be patient.
It is true. He is extremely popular and extremely dedicated and has a long backlog, but I guarantee you, I've had him do work for me before, and it is worth the wait. I am happy to wait, and you should be too.
Well, that was a nice little advertisement.
It's pretty cool because here, as we're doing the podcast, I'm watching an icon ply his craft. Man, I just want to talk about the stolen art now. Fuck. That will be coming, but again, I better get back to this one. Before I'm skinned alive by people who are hopefully engrossed in this story, I should probably keep telling it. So here we are. They've brought the FBI in. Over the ensuing months, detectives January and Woodruff. January is such a great surname for a police officer. Can I just say that? They journey between Waco and El Paso. They have trouble tracking down Ted Young, but they do find Urich's contact list, which opens up avenues into the shadowy world of fraudsters and swindlers who are linked to him. Maybe the sort of people who would steal Anson Maddocks' art and sell it internationally. There's a man named Clark Paulson, who's a, quote, house sitter, unquote, for upscale properties, who acknowledges knowing Urich and Young, and he tells the detectives that Urich had requested the use of his truck for Young, which he delivered and then retrieved at the Red Roof Inn in El Paso. There's another person who owns a vast parcel of desert land near El Paso who confirms that Urich frequently took extended visits to his property. And this person also hints that Urich has deep tendrils extending into an underground criminal network. Among those linked to Sam Urich was an old friend who vanished before the investigators could fully interview him, who was later charged with a near $200 million fraud case against the Royal Bank of Canada. And then they also encountered a man named Ollie Martinez, who admitted to knowing Young and mentioned that Urich had sought Ted Young out at his house, Martinez's house, several times. So Cawthorn tells Martinez how important it is that they locate Ted Young, and Martinez says, "Oh, I can lead you to his whereabouts." And they're like, "Really?" And he says, "Well, sure. He's in Honduras." So I guess he can't exactly lead him to the whereabouts. That's a pretty long overland trip to Honduras.
Urich sounds like he's built some confidence in making as many convolutions to the backgrounds of the people involved. Like the headhunter, coming and looking for Patterson. Is it Patterson? Patterson?
Yeah, Gary Patterson is the name of the man who has disappeared, whose disappearance and probable murder we're currently investigating.
Right. So it seems like that character in this story is just going to sort of vanish, and even if they find him, how solidly is he connected to Urich? So it seems like Urich is sort of trying to play puppet master with different characters and stuff.
You're saying that he's put other people between himself and the actual crime.
Right. Other people with false identities, to try to just erode the solidity of tracing it back to him.
Yeah, that seems right. And I mean, you said puppet master. I think we might also say spy master, which is pretty much the same thing. I think the jury is out on whether master is the appropriate descriptor. But it may be. I mean, certainly he seems to have a great deal of willpower and an extended network contacts and abilities to execute dirty deeds,
and
so to speak.
All that to just to get this father out of the picture, so his granddaughter isn't inaccessible.
Right. That is the prosaic, humanly acceptable explanation, and it does seem that perhaps it was the trigger point, if you will. But like I said, I suspect that it's more of like sociopaths hate to have their pride wounded. From what I understand, they very often don't experience very many human emotions other than sort of pride and rage. And it seems like more than anything, Gary's decision to no longer submit to being Urich's patsy probably inspired his eventual murder, even more so than the reason that we can all sort of understand, although not agree that it justifies murder, but the idea that his daughter wants custody of her child. Yeah. The police tell the U.S. Marshals in El Paso that Ted Young is in Honduras, and the Marshals reply that Martinez is known to be a liar and that his offer to take them to Ted Young may just be a way for him to be trying to get back into Central America himself. That's Martinez. And they caution against going with Martinez because they think he's going to basically try to slip away in Central America. And so that leaves the investigation once again at sort of a dead end. Until finally, another breakthrough comes when Lisa Urich Patterson, Gary Patterson's ex-wife, is jailed for not paying court costs and fees post her probation for kidnapping her daughter. And this gives law enforcement an opening to reapproach Lisa. It gives them some leverage to try to get her to maybe tell them something she knows that she hadn't disclosed before. But before they reapproach Lisa, Texas Ranger Cawthon pursues a lead inspired by local news of young female workers' bodies discovered in the deserts near Juarez. And he's wondering if Patterson's fate might align with that, like perhaps Patterson is just buried in the desert. He decides to inspect a ranch east of Juarez, and upon arrival, a Dodge Charger driven by the property's security head, an ex-military and police enthusiast, approaches the Rangers, kicking up dust. After they share their purpose, the head of security expresses concerns about the legality of their activities on the ranch, and he manages to get them to agree to meet with him later. So the Rangers meet with the head of security, and the Rangers steer the conversation towards the ranch's terrain. The guard says, well, I've walked every inch of that 600 acres. And the Ranger asks, you ever find any bones out there? The guard says, well, yeah, I've got some bones at home on my workbench in my garage. Oh, thanks for mentioning that. Revealing, of course, a potentially crucial piece of evidence. Speaking of having bones at home on your workbench in your garage, don't you have some bones on your workbench, Anson? Are you still working on that project for your friend who got his hip bone removed?
Yeah, it's soaking in mineral spirits right now.
So, everybody, Anson, this is for totally non-nefariously, much like this head of security in El Paso, Anson also has human bones on his workbench in his garage because a friend of Anson's had his hip replaced, and as part of that hip replacement, and Anson, please, in fact, why don't I just have you tell this? So why do you have bones on your workbench in your garage, Anson?
He thought that it would be interesting to have me carve it or paint it or something, and it just seemed like such a compliment to have somebody trust you with something like that I just wasn't able to say no. And then later I was thinking about okay, wait, if I carve it with power tools, that's going to kick dust up everywhere, human dust.
Right. And can I just clarify slightly that this friend had a hip replacement and they removed a piece of his, what is it, tibia, the upper leg bone, the thigh bone?
Top of the femur. Top of the femur. It's the ball, part of the ball and socket.
So you've got a piece of the top of the femur. About how large is this piece of femur?
It's about, the ball is about the size. It's a little bit smaller than a tennis ball, and just has the very top, drop down of the femur. So that was cut off and then replaced with a titanium ball that has a stem that they drive into the top of the femur.
Got it. And your friend wants you to create like a carved sculpture out of this.
Yeah.
And you're concerned about the human bone
dust.
As
you might. It's just...
Yeah. I mean, I'm not questioning the concern.
I mean, it could be any animal, and I would worry about it just smelling terrible. So I'm trying to denature it as much as possible.
I imagine you'll wear a mask when you do any power tool carving so as not to inhale chunks of your friend.
Right.
All right. Well, I may check in with you on future visits about the progress on that project. I'm sure we're all curious to see what you decide to do with that piece of hip bone when the time
might be
comes.
A 20-sider.
Oh, wow. A giant 20-sided die. Wow. That would be very cool. So this head of security, he is not giving these human bones that he found to Anson Maddocks to create art out of. He's just got them moldering in his garage, and he takes the Texas Rangers to his garage where they gather the bleached bone fragments, and then they tell him, look, we're going to have these analyzed by an anthropologist from Baylor, and the guard says, sure, be my guest. Well, they take it to Dr. Susan Mackey Wallace at Baylor University in Waco, and she instantly recognizes that the bones are, in fact, human. And now that they have this knowledge, they decide that it's time to visit the county jail and to speak with Gary's ex, Lisa Patterson. At first, recalls Detective January, she wouldn't say anything. I explained to her that the window of opportunity was closing pretty fast and had in the past day or so gotten even tighter. I told her, you're never going to believe what we found out in the desert in El Paso. And that finally seemed to get Lisa's attention. He revealed that they had found human bones.
That's a pretty good trick. If she was spending any time out there in the desert and, they suspected her of anything, all you'd have to say is, you'll never guess what we found out in the desert.
Right. Yeah, it is a good trick. And, if she knows that Gary is buried out there, please let her assume that they found Gary's bones. They don't have to tell her, and it seems they didn't, just whose bones they found.
That's an old cop trick, isn't it?
Anybody, not that I want you to get away with anything bad, but if you're ever being interrogated by the police for any, real felonious charge, know that there is no law against them lying to you and promising you the moon and telling you whatever they want. That's part of getting you to admit that you committed the crime. So he tells her, we found bones out in El Paso. And January says when she heard that, she leaned forward, the veins on her temples popping out. She was shaking, holding her stomach like it was cramping. And 24 hours later, she was ready to talk. Dun dun dun. So Lisa confessed that she was aware of her father's scheme to entice Gary to El Paso, but then clarifies, but only to beat him up, she insisted. He knew that Gary would come as soon as they offered the new Suburban. Gary loved new cars and toys like that. But she also acknowledged that it was her father's idea for her to request a photograph of Gary under false pretenses. That was when she had asked Gary for a picture of himself to put in their daughter's locket, but she reveals here that the real reason she'd asked for the picture was that the man who was going to approach Gary needed to know what he looked like. And remember, this was all taking place, I believe, we're in 1998 now, so this was about 1996 that this was happening, so the internet existed, but barely. I remember having dial-up internet at the time and downloading a photograph on the internet. I won't say what kind of photograph. Suffice to say I was 15 years old, but it would take over an hour for a single photograph to download millimeter by millimeter. If you wanted to quickly let somebody else know what another person looked like, a physical photograph was really the only way to go, as strange as that may seem to us in today's world. Yeah. So at this point, Johnston, the U.S. attorney, decides that it's time to issue arrest warrants for Sam Urich and Ted Young and to obtain a search warrant to really search the ranch where the bones were found.
There's got to be lots of bones on a ranch.
True, lots of certainly cattle bones, I would imagine, but
cattle,
it seems like
pigs, goats, dogs, cats. Yeah.
Yes. Now, they do have their bone expert at Baylor University, but I think also, and who knows if it's some deep-seated evolutionary reaction, but I think even to the scientifically uninitiated, human bones are fairly distinctive. I grew up very rurally and saw a lot of bones scattered around the wilderness, whether they were cattle bones or, animal bones, and it never occurred to me that any of those bones were human. And I think I would have known
what I was
if they
getting
were.
at was the size of the property.
Yes.
And the means in which they would look for the bones, which might be like dogs or whatever. But running across a lot of other types of bones would make the search maybe a little more difficult.
No, absolutely true. And I'm not sure exactly how they conducted that search. I would imagine they started by having the head of security take them to where he had found the now confirmed human bones and probably started there and then worked their way out. And in fact, they did find a body, which brings us back to where we started this story. They found a body, but it was not Gary Patterson's. It was a victim of a different crime, and that's a different story. Meanwhile, they were closing in on Urich through a trail of documents and phone records, and they learned that he had been captured near Las Vegas by U.S. Marshals, who hadn't, here's the Marshals being helpful again, hadn't informed them of their knowledge of his whereabouts beforehand. But finally, the Marshals did, in fact, capture Urich. So Texas Ranger Cathon found out that Urich had been arrested at a Sunday party for his kids' school friends, and U.S. Attorney Johnston pulled him aside to discuss next steps and told him, you've got to go to Honduras. We need Ted Young. So in August of 1998, Cathon, Ranger, and you're about to hear the best Texas Ranger name that I've ever encountered, Cathon, along with Ranger Cleet Buckaloo, that's Cleet, C-L-E-T-E, Buckaloo, B-U-C-K-A-L-O-O. That man was destined to be a Texas Ranger from the very moment his mother signed the birth certificate. You can't convince me otherwise.
Sounds like he stepped out of Buckaroo Banzai or something.
Yeah. Cleet Buckaloo is pretty amazing. Cleet Buckaloo, I'm going to keep saying it, and Secret Service agents flew from Miami to Tegucigalpa, Honduras. And this was really unfamiliar territory. I mean, it was an unprecedented move by Texas law enforcement to apprehend a suspect. Obviously, they have no jurisdiction in Honduras. They're not the Honduras Rangers, but they went to the U.S. Embassy for support, and they prepared a complex operation. And it's interesting, Urich was, of course, rumored to have been this CIA or rogue CIA operative, and whether or not that was true, and it seems like it may have been, the nature and the details of this case have turned it into something of a spy movie regardless. After all, here are Texas Rangers flying to Honduras to try to apprehend a suspect and meeting up somewhat clandestinely in the U.S. Embassy to plan their operation. I mean, my gosh, somebody buy these movie rights. So their initial plan was to try to detain Ted Young in Honduras, hoping that he could bolster their case against Sam Urich. But it turns out that, if you'll remember, U.S. Marshal Cassie Roundtree, who had assured everyone that the marshals had everything under control and then proceeded to essentially do nothing for months, she kicks up a big fuss in Washington. She escalates it all the way to Washington, D.C., objecting vehemently to the presence in Honduras and concerned about potential international fallout. So even though there's this U.S. government dispute happening about their presence in Honduras, Texas Rangers, they get shit done, and they weren't about to let that stop them from getting their man. I'm sure the Rangers said something like, well, hell, if the U.S. Marshals want to let bureaucracy keep them from capturing a fugitive, they can go right ahead, but we're Texas Rangers. They uncover computer records that document entries and exits from Honduras, and they discover that Ted Young had entered using a passport issued to his twin brother Fred, who aided him in fleeing the country after his conviction in South Carolina.
Twin brother.
Yeah, pretty handy if you're going to be an international fugitive to have an identical twin brother who doesn't mind handing you his passport whenever you need to go on the lam. Note to self, have identical twin brother if you want to be international fugitive. And as they're uncovering these records of his entrances and exits, they realize that the timing aligns with his appearances in Waco and El Paso. And then some of the locals tell the Rangers about a dilapidated junkyard that's operated by the gringo. That's what they call him. And they show the Rangers a wrinkled photograph of the junkyard. And so the Rangers go and they stake out the junkyard.
Are you going to kill me if I say I think it's dilapidated?
No, thank you. It is dilapidated. Yeah, geez, Zevin.
No, you're not the only one you're not the only one who puts a T in there.
I bet I'm not, but still,
Sure.
Thank you. Everybody loves a grammar maven.
Yeah, right.
I'm just pretending to be gracious right now, Anson. I'm secretly seething.
I actually appreciate it when somebody does that for me. It's like something in your teeth.
Well, everybody, soak this all in because I want to let you know that this will be Anson's triumphant final episode. Yeah.
All the editing.
So they stake out the dilapidated junkyard.
Sorry.
And eventually, no, I'm just acting angry because I think it's good theater. Dilapidated junkyard, and eventually they do apprehend Ted Young, and they take him to a nearby police station in San Pedro. They take him to the Sula jail. So when he gets captured in Honduras, he's convinced he's been apprehended for evading his South Carolina fraud conviction, and he says to him, "I'll tell you straight, the U.S. government screwed me over my entire life. I didn't do a damn thing wrong. They were itching to throw me in prison. It ain't fair." But Cathon, he interjects swiftly. He says, "Ted, we're Texas Rangers. We're Texas Rangers in Honduras, catcher." I'm sorry. I was
Actually, it's not bad. It's pretty good.
Hey, well, I was going to add some more. What he actually says is, "Ted, we're Texas Rangers. We're not here to discuss South Carolina or the government. That's all in the past. We're here about Gary Patterson." When Cathon says this, Young looks like he'd seen a ghost. I don't know anything about that," said hoarsely. So for the next 30 minutes, the Ranger meticulously outlined the evidence accumulated by himself and the Waco police. He says, "We're aware your alias is Ned Wright. We have information about your stays at the Fairfield Inn in Waco and the Red Roof Inn in El Paso. We know you were in the company of Clark Paulson and Sam Urich. We're well aware, Ted. The decision you face is whether to cooperate with us or face a lifetime behind bars for shielding Sam Urich." Ted Young silently fixed his gaze on Cathon for a while. Then he let out a heavy sigh. "Fine," he relented. "I'll tell you what you want to know." And finally, the violent truth of the conspiracy behind Gary Patterson's disappearance was revealed. Dun dun dun. You ready for that violent truth?
Let's hear it.
Sam Urich had reached out to Ted Young, urging him to return to the United States and assist with a matter concerning his son-in-law. According to Young, Urich had been sending him used trucks to sell ever since he'd been evading the authorities in Honduras. He owed him some favors, Young confessed, so he agreed. It's pretty wild that he's hiding in Honduras to escape capture for the fraud conviction, and yet he agrees to come back to the United States to help with a murder plot. But he must have really felt like he owed Urich. But killing Gary hadn't been as easy as they thought. The Florida plan fell apart when Patterson insisted on bringing his girlfriend, like we talked about earlier. So Florida falls through, and then they pick him up at the Waco airport and take him to an area near China Springs where Urich plans to kill him and dispose of the body in an oil drum. However, Patterson doesn't show up, so they devise the El Paso plan instead. Throughout most of that fateful day in May, Young kept Patterson occupied, delaying their meeting, and this was a meeting with the boss for the supposed new job, until it was dark. They had lunch and visited a few bars until Patterson got pretty drunk. Eventually, Young told him they needed to pick up a soil sample on the way to meet the CEO, because if you'll recall, Patterson was an environmental engineer. Getting wasted before your meeting with the new boss seems like a questionable choice, but I'm not here to victim blame. So he tells him we have to pick up a soil sample, and so they drive out to the desert, and Patterson starts to fall asleep because he's drunk. Upon arrival at the designated spot, Young retrieves a .22 pistol from under the driver's seat and aims it at Patterson, who suddenly woke up. Sam Urich appears, opening the passenger door with a smile, and says to Patterson, "I've got you now, motherfucker." He proceeds to bind Patterson's arms and legs with duct tape before pulling him out of the truck. "Sam told me to go back into town," Young recalled. He said, "Get out of here and don't come back until tomorrow. This is going to take all night." Oh, God. Young promptly returns to the Red Roof Inn and calls a local escort service. The next morning, Young tells the Rangers, "I asked Sam where Gary was, and Sam answered, he's in the desert." Cawthon slid a notepad across the table. "Show me where in the desert." Young says, well, the original plan was for that old ranch east of town, but they had security there, so we chose a spot nearby. Later that evening, Cawthon contacts Detective Steve January in El Paso, instructing him to assemble a search party. "I'm faxing you the map where Gary Patterson's body is buried," he says. On August 3rd, 1998, authorities unearthed a body buried in a shallow grave at a location pinpointed by a search dog. Detective January halted the digging, roped off the area, and called for aerial photographs and video documentation. Dirt sifters and metal detectors were employed to search for any evidence of bullets or shell casings. The medical examiner was also summoned. A lieutenant from the El Paso Sheriff's Department, gosh, there's a lot of pissing matches in this story, but a lieutenant from the El Paso Sheriff's Department objects to the search, claiming it's outside of the El Paso Police Department's jurisdiction and demanding that local authorities take over. Despite Detective January's attempts to explain the federal nature of the investigation, the sheriff's lieutenant remains adamant. To resolve the issue, U.S. Attorney in El Paso Johnston suggests stationing an officer at the road entrance and says, "If the lieutenant attempts to intervene, have him arrested."
That's pretty cinematic.
I like that. Yeah, I just, it's like, oh yeah, he doesn't respect federal authority? Well, how about this? "I knew the body was Gary Patterson," January reflects, "and all I wanted was to be absolutely certain we did everything as perfectly as possible. We'd come too far to take any chance of messing something up." The body, still clad in a white shirt and black jeans and the boots that Patterson had reportedly worn, was carefully unearthed and transported to the medical examiner's office. While the coroner would officially confirm the body's identity the next day, January had no doubt. From the moment the grave was uncovered, he felt certain that the lengthy search had reached its conclusion. After 15 months of investigation, everything had finally aligned in just 10 days. Gathering the exhausted search team together, January expressed gratitude on behalf of the Patterson family and the Waco Police Department and the Texas Rangers. There were more words he wanted to say, but his voice faltered. With a silent nod, he excused himself to find a moment alone. Alone in the solitude of his SUV parked nearby, January experienced a rare moment of vulnerability. For the first time in his law enforcement career, he cried. In a Waco courtroom, in late September 1999, Sam Urich and Ted Young pleaded guilty to the murder of Gary Patterson. Urich, aged 59, received a life sentence, avoiding the possibility of the death penalty sought by Bill Johnston by pleading guilty. Following the arrest, Urich confessed to repeatedly beating Patterson with a pipe before burying him in the desert that night. However, he refused to acknowledge the possibility that he had buried Patterson alive. despite the coroner's findings indicating sand inhalation in the thorax. So he had buried Gary Patterson alive. Man, that's tough. Buried alive is a particular horror in my mind. There's many there are many horrors, but that one ranks high on the list for me.
That sets off my mild claustrophobia and turns it into a big nightmare.
Yeah. I get claustrophobic sitting in like the third row of an SUV. So the idea of being buried alive is just makes my skin crawl. As Sam Urich was escorted from the courtroom after sentencing, he briefly turned to glare at Gary's father, who was present among the spectators. Man, that is one evil dude. You murder somebody's son and take the time out of exiting the courtroom after sentencing to give their parents the stink eye? Oh my God. Ted Young, aged 49, pleaded guilty to being an accessory to murder for hire and carrying a firearm during a crime of violence. He received a 20-year sentence, which would be added to the 51 months he still owed South Carolina for the bank fraud. Prior to entering his plea, Young disclosed that Urich had driven him from El Paso to Corpus Christi, where Urich took $180 in cash from Patterson's body. Using his twin brother's passport, Young had then crossed the border into Mexico and eventually returned to Honduras. Federal Judge Walter Smith, after handing down sentences to Urich and Young, expressed his concern from the bench about the lack of federal involvement in the investigation. After all, fugitives who had fled to another country were ultimately captured by the Texas Rangers and the El Paso PD. While the judge did not directly mention the U.S. Marshal's Office, those familiar with the case's convoluted history understood that it was a clear criticism of the Marshals on his part. Lisa Urich Patterson, who previously pleaded guilty to misprision of felony for failing to report the plans to murder her ex-husband, received a 3-year prison term. This was added to the 2 years she was already serving for violating the terms of her parole. She also relinquished parental rights to her daughter, who now lives with Gary Patterson's parents. In El Paso, Craig Paulson, who had loaned the truck to Ted Young at the behest of Sam Urich, faced the same charges as Lisa, but he maintained that he had no knowledge of the intentions behind the pickup truck he loaned, and consequently he was acquitted of all charges. In February of 2000, U.S. Attorney Bill Johnston, who had been instrumental in pulling the case out of the quagmire of federal bureaucracy and also in the finding, as we just heard, of Gary Patterson's body when he was able to stop the sheriff's department from screwing everything up. In February of 2000, Bill Johnston stepped down from his role as assistant U.S. attorney amidst national controversy. Upon discovering that critical evidence regarding the FBI's use of pyrotechnic tear gas grenades in the 93 Davidian compound standoff had not been disclosed by Justice Department officials, Johnston wrote a letter to Attorney General Janet Reno to bring attention to the matter. Subsequently, he found himself marginalized within his own Western district, stripped of responsibilities and excluded from staff meetings. He resigned and returned to private practice in Waco. So Bill Johnston, who is the undercover, low-key hero of this story in some ways, again did the right thing, notified people that the U.S. Attorney's Office had concealed key evidence in the Branch Davidian case, and for that, he was blatantly punished by Attorney General Janet Reno. He had his wings clipped badly enough that he felt like he could no longer do his job and had to resign and go into private practice. That's a bummer. Yeah. Poor Bill Johnston got punished for telling the truth to power and resigned and went into private practice in Waco. As for the .22 pistol that Ted Young had brandished at Gary Patterson during the desert encounter that would lead to Gary's murder, it was eventually surrendered to authorities by Sam Urich's wife. It now rests on a shelf in the Texas Rangers headquarters office of Matt Cawthon, who says the weapon is a reminder.
Was Urich's wife mentioned in the story other than just now?
She was not. He went to prison for life, and I guess she had the pistol and turned it over to authorities. But no, she was not mentioned previously. Anson, I've started doing something at the end of Kinda Murdery Stories that I hadn't done previously, but I've been doing it now. And what I do is I offer 3 key takeaways and a moral of the story. I sort of imagine, and not that the horrible events of a story like this should be reduced in this way, but I sort of imagine that if this terrible tale was an Aesop's fable, what would the moral of the story be? So Now I'm going to take you and the audience through what I see as kind of the 3 key takeaways here, and also the moral of the story. And I make no claim to being correct. Everyone should draw their own conclusion, have their own key takeaways, their own morals. And I certainly invite you, Anson, if you feel like I've left out something really important, or that the things that I've chosen to be important are not so important, feel free to challenge me on these takeaways and the moral. So do you promise to be my harshest critic if you don't like what I have to say?
I'll tear you up.
All right. All right. So takeaway number 1 from the murder of Gary Patterson. Love can convince you wrong is right. And again, as I said before, this is giving a sort of human motivation to Sam Urich that perhaps he doesn't deserve. But here we go. Love can convince you wrong is right. The story of Sam Urich's misguided actions, to say the least, underscores how love, particularly paternal love, can blind individuals to moral boundaries, leading them to justify nefarious deeds in the name of protecting or avenging loved ones. Now, as I said before, I'm not sure that this takeaway necessarily really applies to Sam Urich. I think he might have killed Gary Patterson more because he was pissed at him for no longer wanting to be his patsy. That said, as a takeaway and an insight into human nature, I do think that there is truth to this, that love can convince you wrong is right, and that we are very often willing to do or do things on behalf of those we love that we know intellectually are wrong, but that don't feel wrong because they're in the service of a person we love, and love often operates as a higher authority in our minds and moral compasses. What do you think of that?
He joyously murdered his granddaughter's father.
Right.
And it sounded like maybe he wasn't a bad father.
That too.
And
fuck that key takeaway.
No. It's just the sociopathic aspect of this guy might sort of take him off a list that I can relate to.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that actually in this story, this key takeaway doesn't apply. It only applies when we try to shoehorn Sam Urich's actions into something that we could understand, perhaps. But the context of the story and his own history, etc., seems to suggest that it wasn't love of his daughter or his granddaughter that motivated his violence.
It's pride.
Yes, but I still think that to the extent that we try to use the story to illuminate larger truths about people and why they do things, that perhaps that this is a takeaway that can be applied elsewhere, if not here.
So, are you thinking the fox and the cheese?
Yeah. Well, we haven't gotten to the moral yet. Let's do. And I would also just say that the reason I decided to do these key takeaways and morals was because I realized that I often lead people through these really dark, terrible stories that, while they may be compelling and fascinating and even thrilling in some way, it can be a pretty harrowing journey. And I thought that maybe I ought to do some work to talk to people and think about myself. Why is it worthwhile that we just went on this harrowing journey? Like, it shouldn't just be masochism or sadism or fascination or morbidity or whatever or morbid fascination, whatever you want to call it. Hopefully there should be something worthwhile to be gleaned from these terrible journeys we go on. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
I know
here.
what Brenda would say.
What's that?
It's good to keep in mind the possibilities of a situation that you might take you by surprise. It's good to have some information, in your back pocket that you can use to maybe avoid a situation if you see it coming.
That's a really great point, to be aware of what
Patterns.
people are capable of.
Yeah.
I mean, I've given my daughter this advice, and I think it's very true. I would tell anyone, not just my daughter, but it's essentially trust your instincts. If your animal consciousness, if your instinct tells you that you're endangered or something is off or what have you, don't worry that you're being impolite or rude or judging a book by its cover or whatever it may be. trust your instincts and remove yourself from the situation. I think sometimes people's internal alarm bells go off and then they stop and they say, well, it's not really right or fair for me to feel this way for all of these other reasons that I intellectually believe to be true. And they sometimes can override their own protective instincts in service of trying to be a better person.
Yeah.
And of course, as a father, my paramount concern is my daughter's well-being, and for anyone, their paramount concern should be their own well-being and the well-being of those they love. And so, yeah, trust your instincts. Okay, on to takeaway number 2. Takeaway number 2, something an old boss of mine used to say: a favor will kill you faster than a bullet. Ted Young's fatal allegiance to Urich, not that Ted Young was killed, metaphorically will kill you faster than a bullet. Ted Young's allegiance to Urich serves as a stark reminder that indebtedness, especially when something is owed to those involved in criminal enterprises, can swiftly spiral into betrayal and tragedy, and sometimes worse. So yeah, be careful who you do favors for. Okay, takeaway number 3. In jurisdictional pissing contests, justice is the only thing that gets pissed on. So the jurisdictional chaos surrounding the Gary Patterson case, highlighted by the U.S. Marshals mishandling and ensuing power struggles, even kicking up a fuss in Washington to try to hamstring the Texas Rangers in Honduras, illustrates how bureaucratic disputes can overshadow the pursuit of justice, leaving victims and their families abandoned in the fray of legal battles and ego clashes. In jurisdictional pissing contests, justice is the only thing that gets pissed on. That's takeaway number 3.
Yeah, I agree.
The moral of our tragic story today is: a heart set on evil attracts good reasons, that's in quotes, good reasons, like moths to a flame. A heart set on evil attracts good reasons, like moths to a flame. And this is a bit of a rebuttal to that takeaway number 1, love can convince you wrong is right, applying to Sam Urich. As we said, it probably doesn't. But the moral of the story here to me is that if you're set on an evil deed, if you've decided you want to murder your son-in-law, you can always find a plausible, morally defensible, although, again, not really, but a plausible reason why the evil that you want to commit is not, in fact, evil, may, in fact, be good. That's why you often hear tyrants speak of the greater good, because their hearts are set on evil. But a heart set on evil finds good reasons, like a moth finds a flame, and that's your moral.
That reminds me of another saying that is similar, and I can't pull it together right now.
Well, thanks for sharing the inner workings of your mind with us, anyway.
Yeah, you can hear the crickets, right?
No, but I love it. It's all good stuff. Anson, as always, it's been an absolute joy and pleasure to spend this time with you, even when traversing tragic terrain like the story of the disappearance of Gary Patterson, which really is much more of a almost political thriller than I expected it to be going in.
It was the strongest dynamic, wasn't it? It was the clash with the different departments and different jurisdictional problems.
Yeah, and also the international manhunt and all of that. I mean, wow. But it's always a pleasure being here with you, my friend.
Thank you, Zevin, for inviting me, and let me go over this story with you.
Until next time, for Anson Maddocks, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.